Welcome to part 6 of this video series on Savage Worlds and Fantasy Grounds. Today we will cover Arcane Backgrounds and using powers in Savage Worlds. Please note that powers is just another word for spells. They're called powers in Savage Worlds because they need to fit all the various settings that you can play Savage Worlds in. I may slip up and say spells instead of powers, but whenever I refer of spells I mean powers. You have Arcane Backgrounds. These work like any other edge, so instead of using another edge, you can just take Arcane Backgrounds. There are various kinds. I have listed all of the ones in the vanilla rule set here. So we have Magic, Miracles, Psionics, Gifted, and Weird Science. All of the ones on the left side work fairly similar. However, the amount of starting powers and power points may slightly differ, and each of them has a different arcane skill that you use whenever you try to activate a power. You simply pick your power, you choose how many power points you want to use with modifiers and everything. We'll get into all of that, and then you just cast your spells. Weird Science, on the other hand, is a little bit different. So instead of just picking your spell and casting it, you actually have to create a device in advance that you use to make your powers work in the world. So you create a device, and that device has a certain amount of power points assigned to it. Let's say you create a bolt powered ray gun and you decide to put 5 power points into it. What happens then? By default, you get 15 power points when you take the Weird Science Arcane Background. You have assigned 5 power points to your bolt ray gun, which means you have now reduced your maximum power points by these 5 points. So you will only have 10 power points left that you can then spend on creating whatever other power you have chosen. Whenever you're using a power as a weird scientist, it will be used from that item, and you will regain your maximum power points back as you're using up the power points within that item that you've created. You're the only one that can use the device that you've created. However, there is something called Artificer, which we'll get to in the end of this video, which allows you to give out your devices that you've created to other people as well. One final note, you can jury rig, so you can say, I don't have the power prepared that I need right now, but I really need that power and I still have some power points left. You can then say, well, there are all the materials that I need to create a device like this in this room, so I will jury rig something. We'll then roll for Weird Science at a -2 and we'll still be able to use that spell. Please note that a lot of these arcane backgrounds change depending on the setting you're playing in. So always make sure that it has not changed because of your setting, or that your setting even forbids some of the arcane backgrounds or changes them. A very common thing that may happen is that only certain powers can be taken by certain arcane backgrounds. So make sure that you understand how arcane backgrounds work in your setting on top of these basic rules that we're going through today. Now let's look at some powers. I have 2 powers open here. One is Bolt and one is Boost Lower Trade. Now every power has the necessary rank, how much power points it costs, the range, the duration, and the trappings listed. The range means we have our Mason Longbeard from the last videos, and it has a smarts of 10. So the range of this bolt would be 20 fields, 20 inches, whatever unit you want to use. I say 20 squares, maybe. So this is how you calculate how long your range is. I always allow my players to use the attribute associated with their arcane skill. So if your spells are based on the Fate skill, I would say instead of saying Smarts ×2, you have Spirit ×2 as range. But this is a homebrew. The duration is how long it lasts. So instant means you apply it and then it immediately goes away. Boost Lower Trade, on the other hand, has a duration of 5. So this will last for 5 rounds and then terminate itself. And then we come to trappings. Trappings are how your spells look like when they manifest in the world. Instead of just casting a bolt and it hasn't any particular look, you're given some examples and you can even make up some of your own. So for bolt, it's listed as fire, ice, light, darkness, colored bolt, stream of insects. But maybe you're sitting there and thinking, oh, I wanted to make a lightning mage, and that one is not listed here. Most DMs will be perfectly fine with you picking something that is not explicitly listed in the trappings. These trappings have no immediate effect on how the spell works. So all the calculations, all the rolling and everything will stay the same. However, occasionally it may have some additional kind of functionality. So if you were to cast a firebolt on an enemy covered in oil, then it's perfectly reasonable to say that this enemy catches fire, or maybe you need to roll an additional die to see whether that enemy catches fire. And there is also something called synergy. So if you have that lightning bolt that I suggested and an enemy is standing in water, it's perfectly reasonable to argue, hey, I get a +2 on the damage, or the effect gets stronger that I'm doing. While if they are wearing some kind of rubber suit, it would be a -2. Please always note, oppositional forces have no synergy. So if you're hitting an enemy that is burning with an ice bolt, then those two just cancel each other out, so you would get no synergy. One important bit when it comes to trappings, you choose these as you choose the power and they cannot be changed afterwards. So please keep that in mind. Now let's read on. So there is an explanation of how it works and how it looks, if there are range penalties and so on. So this is just the basic information on how the spell works. And below that we have modifiers. Modifiers can be added to a spell and they generally add additional functionality that the spell didn't have originally. Now these are different from spell to spell. So if we look here, we have armor piercing damage, fatigue, glow, shroud. But if you look here, we have additional recipients, hinder, hurry, which is also in there, but no lingering damage, no extra damage. So depending on which spell you're using, the modifiers will be slightly different. The way this works is before you cast your spell, you declare, I want to add the armor piercing modifier. You have to choose how many power points you want to spend for this one. So you can do 1 or 2 or 3 on this one. If it's just a damage one, it will be a straight +2. And then you get that additional effect. So this one, the power has armor piercing 2 for each additional power point. Let's just say we go full on, we do a +3. So we would spend the normal 1 power point that the spell costs and add another 3 on top. You get an armor piercing of 6 on that bolt. So if there is a heavily armored enemy, this might be a good way of getting around that pesky armor. You always must declare these modifiers beforehand. If we're looking over at boost lower trait, there is the power may affect more than one target for 1 additional power point each. So what you can do, if you have an entire team or your entire group that you want to give this boost lower trait, then you can totally do that. So it will cost the normal 2 power points, and let's say there are 4 people in your group. So you hit 1 with the 2 power points, and then the other 3 would be additional recipients. So we'll put 3 on top, so it would cost 5 power points to have 4 people covered under boost trait in this case. I would just recommend to read through. All of these modifiers are fairly straightforward, so I don't think you'll have too much problems. You may see that with these modifier spells can get very expensive. Are there ways of making them cheaper? Yes, of course. There are limitations that you can put on your powers. So let's say these 2 power points are too expensive for you. Range, smart, you don't need that. So how about we just say range touch? You can do this, but you take the power then permanently as one that you can only use in touch range. That would, however, reduce the cost of the power by 1. An alternative would have been that you say, I will only ever use boost trait, never lower trait, and you could cross out that lower trait and just get boost trait, and since you're taking away an aspect of that spell, you're also reducing your power points by 1. So this is a good way of making spells cheaper. Now let's say we are ready, we want to cast a spell. So first you say which spell you want to cast and what modifiers you want to put on it. Now if you are like me and have already set up a character sheet with some spells on it, you can simply double click on a spell and it will tell you what you rolled. So in this case I've rolled a 4, hooray, that means my spell was successful and is going out. Now this one costs 1 power point, so I just spent 1 power point. If I had modifiers on top, I would spend more power point. If this is an 8, then I would do a raise. So I would even get some bonus abilities. In this case, I would do 3d6 instead of 2d6. If I had less than a 4, so a failure, I would spend 1 power point regardless of how many modifiers or anything else that I had going on there. And if I had a critical failure, it would give me a level of fatigue if we are doing rules as written. I personally do dynamic backlash, or even go one step further, I have a wild magic table that I use. Personally, this choice is up to you. I think fatigue works well enough, but if you're ever interested in doing something more interesting, definitely look at your options there. Now this boost lower trait lasts for 5 turns. Maybe you say, I want this to last longer. So what you can do, as soon as the duration of the spell expires, you can spend one power point and extend it for another base duration, so another 5 turns. This cost is per target, so if you are affecting multiple targets, then it will take multiple power points. Only ever one power point per target, but if you are affecting these 4 targets from earlier, you would need to spend 4 power points to maintain it on all 4 targets. You can use multiple powers in one turn. You just have the 2-action multi-action penalty, or 3 actions if you're doing 3-action penalty. Nothing else changes. And sometimes you want to cast it cheaper, but you haven't taken it with one of the limitations. You can also short a power. This reduces the cost of the power, so you can go down by 1 power point, for example, but increases the challenge that you need to roll. So if you were to reduce this by 1 power point, you would need to roll a 5 or higher to succeed. Very important, if you fail on that roll, it's considered a critical failure. You cannot re-roll it and you get a level of fatigue instantly. And one final thing to think about, you may not cast while you're bound. So this is the only limitations where you cannot cast any spells. Now you've been casting your spells left and right and you're slowly using up your power points. How do you get them back? You recover 5 power points per hour resting. Resting means things like sleeping, meditating, or light travel. You cannot be marching and you cannot be driving a car unless it's a really leisurely space and easy to drive road. But really, you just need to be resting. And of course, if you're currently maintaining a power, you cannot recover power points either. With that, we have concluded the most important bits about the powers. Many of these powers have a lot more going on in them, but it would be going too in depth. If you have questions about a certain power, how does it work, just ask in the comments and I'll try to do my best to answer your questions. Or join the Fantasy Grounds College Discord, because this is where you will usually find me, and I'm much faster replying to your questions. Now, one final thing, we've talked a little bit while we were talking about weird science, arcane devices. So sometimes you want to make an item that has a spell inside. For example, we go back to this miracles, you have a healing spell, and it's stupid that you always have to be in touch range to heal someone. So you're considering making healing potions. For that, you need to take a specific edge called Artificer, the Seasoned Edge, and you can, as soon as you've taken that, you can do this. It works very similar to making these arcane devices with weird science. Now you pick a spell and create an item out of this. You need to pick how many power points you want to assign to that arcane device, and that gets then reduced from your maximum power points that you have. These do not come back until the device is used or destroyed. Creating the device takes 1 hour per power point that is stored inside the device, and the creator rolls on their arcane skill to create it. You then have that item ready, so let's say you've made a healing potion with 3 power points stored in it, which is the cost of the power, and you give it to a warrior. Now that warrior then is in combat and says, oh damn, I'm taking a lot of damage, I better use that healing potion. What they then need to do is they need to roll for an appropriate skill for that device. Now in a healing potion, there is not really an appropriate skill, so we are just rolling the fate arcane skill of whoever created it. However, this will be done without any edges or bonuses that you may have on that arcane skill. You just roll the pure skill roll that the creator has. If it was that ray gun from earlier, then there is an appropriate skill, shooting. So you would roll for shooting to use the gun and not the arcane skill of the weird scientist. Then there may be something like you make a potion with slumber in it, so it causes people to go sleep. There, an appropriate skill may be athletics, so that you throw the potion. So whatever skill seems appropriate is the skill that you want to use. If you're ever then in the position where you're saying, I ran out of power points and I urgently need power points, you can tinker with a device that you've created and suck up to 5 power points out of it per action. However, this does not work the other way around. So you cannot put power points back into the item. You can only ever take it out of the item. Now this was an overview over how the arcane backgrounds work, how you cast spells, how the modifiers work, everything about trappings and arcane devices. I hope this was useful and we'll continue next time with the DMing videos.